But this is the Edward Snowden tweet and quote, and I thought I'd share this with you today because I know you get a buzz out of it. I've never understood the political fear of libertarians. Sure, they're not in power now, but someday they might take over and leave you alone, I guess. It's that kind of the whole deal.
Yeah, we want to leave you alone, mate. We don't want to govern you.
It's like being afraid of cats.
Yeah,
that's
right.
That's right.
That's a great tweet.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
It is.
Stand up, speak out, don't just toe the line, 'cause the future's ours to write if we learn to read between the lines.
Hi guys, Paul Seils here from Between the Lines podcast. Thank you for joining us. We've got a very special guest today, Jim Willmott, joining us. Jim, thanks for joining us.
No worries. Thank you for having me, Paul.
It's good to be here. It's a bit of a pressure cooker at the moment in Australian political landscape. And you're with the Libertarian Party. Thank you for taking the time. We want to cover a little bit of ground today in what we have available to get across who you are,
Yep.
what the Libertarian Party is about for the uninitiated, for people that don't know anything about the Libertarian Party, and your commentary on the Australian political landscape moving forward. I don't know about you, but for me, the last 10 or 20 years have gone like that.
They have.
Yeah.
I guess from my point of view that I want, I was lucky when we grew up that it's totally different to what it is now. That but
Pre-internet.
It was pre-internet. Yeah. I used to pose around with my big bag phone when I was a bureaucrat. Look at the size of it. But it's about what are we leaving for our children and the legacy for the country, because I can see that what we're feeling now, and I say this around when I'm talking to people say, yeah, I just know where we are, who we are. We are in a transition that, we're full on socialists now, yeah? We've come from less control, we're going to more control. We're in the transition to full communism. Yeah. And I can see that happening, and I want to stop that. And I want to divert that back to a traditional Australia that we all loved, we all felt a part of. And if I can have some way in helping pivot that with other people, I'm not going to do it alone. Yeah. I just see the time that I've got left, that's where I can devote my energy. And I've been doing that outside when I haven't been a senator. I thought, well, if I can use the power of the Senate to do that inside the House, but I say to people, I'll do more carnage outside because you do have more relevance when you're a senator, to bring more alliance on the ground, to get people to work together, to build that architecture so we can bring more people into it. That's where the power is made. That's where the other ones haven't been focusing. And I know Robert's saying when he speaks now, when he was asked the other day, what is he going to do differently? He's been in 9 years, and this term he said, I'm going to do more work outside. Because they see it as a massive gap, mate. They haven't used, because we're only going to be crossbench senators. Sometimes you get up and have a speech and there's no bastard in the room. Yeah. No. Yeah. Well, but use your power to form alliances, bring issues down. So this is what's happened. Look at this. Imagine if yesterday I was a senator and I stood in front of the crops going, what the hell are you doing? We would have had media there. It would have had a lot more grunt, hey? Yes. A lot more people power. That's what those senators should be doing. Getting down into the trenches with people and helping them get their government back, their lives back. Still going in there, forming relationships, asking the hard questions, transparency, accountability, just like Rennick and Roberts have done. They've done a great job at that. But what they have failed to do, and I can say this openly, is to get alliances happening on the ground in grassroots communities, whether it's urban, rural, remote. That's where you get Australians to come together and they can follow leaders that want to make that happen and bring that power in.
So can you give us a little bit of background? Here we are in 2025. You put yourself forward as a candidate for the Libertarian Party. Yep. Can you give us a little bit about your background, about who you are and how you came to get to this point in time?
Look, I spent most of my life in rural and regional Queensland. Was born in Perth, but we moved here at a very young age. We owned numerous farms around the southeast, principally, small crops, beef cattle, bit of dairy. I was educated in a public school, moved, I got a tertiary education at Gatton College, went all through that, then got a job in the public service for a decade. Yes. Climbed the change there, went to places like far out west, Longreach, Blackall, Junda, and then climbed the ranks and got a senior policy position in Brisbane. and worked on a number of whole government policies for the then Beattie government at the time. So I was recognised at a few high levels of how we overcame a number of key biosecurity issues, because that's my discipline. And left there. Also worked in New South Wales DPI and a lot of local governments down there, but then went back to farming and biosecurity consultancy, working with private clients, local government clients. So really over that time, I really got involved in, when I went back to the bush, I got engaged with real local politics and what was happening. And really what I saw that, this, 7, 8 years ago, people were really getting abandoned, and you could really see the growing bureaucracy, the red tape, when you're involved in prime industries and farming, how it was just stifling us. It was unfair, and a lot of the policy and legislation coming out of government, local, state and federal, just wasn't evidence-based. It was ideologically based, and it just wasn't it wasn't getting good outcomes on the ground.
No.
And so that really led me to get involved in groups like Property Rights Australia, where I've chaired for a number of years, and I'm still on the board, and even the Green Shirts movement. I was one of the founding members of that. And I guess that's where the Libertarians came and tapped me on the shoulder, because they liked what they saw with my role in Property Rights Australia, like standing up and standing up for people's property rights, whether they're in the urban fringe and right out to large sprawling stations. And that's what attracted me to the Libertarians, because they liked, they're all about, one of their key principles is protection of property rights, expansion of property rights. So, I thought, and really like what they all about: small government, more efficient government, less government spending, lower taxes, and less regulation. So I couldn't say no.
Sure.
It was right, all the ingredients that the Libertarian Party had offered, that they really appealed to me. I think they appeal to a lot of Australians at this point in time.
Okay. So can we just establish as well what the Libertarian Party stands for? Because I think there's a lot of people that haven't discovered it. In the conversation, they think they only have to be able to vote for the top 2 or 3 parties to make any difference. Or some people have a misconstrued concept of what libertarian means. I know there's perhaps different versions for Australia compared to the US.
There is.
And some people think it's like a bunch of anarchists that want to burn the government to the ground. So can you tell us a little bit what the Libertarian Party stands for?
Definitely. So we're a principle-based party, and we've got values, like I said before, maintaining small government, free markets, and individual liberty. So we think government is the biggest threat to those values. And we've got a set of principles that cover like our economic principles, which is a free trade, where there's things like small governments that have like lower spending, lower taxes, and lower regulation, moving government closer to the people. So you've got like decentralisation of government, but always having an ethical government that's constituted of democracy under the rule of law. And so you're right. There's a lot of people that think like they look at the American model of libertarianism, and there's some factions in libertarianism that think they just want to have no government at all, and that's just ridiculous. We're all about reducing government to a size where we can still have a civilised society. And I think that appeals to a lot of the people, because when you look, even what the major parties are saying for the growth of government, equal government is it? The growth of government is just the bigger government grows, the more taxes, and then they feed you back some subsidies to try and make up for the growth. So we just think, like one of our principles as well is that you're accountable, you're responsible for your own life, and you know how best to live your own life, to look after your kids, your family, where the government wants to get into that. They're into our education system, saying this is how you should teach your child. This is what a man and a woman is. All these different things. Government is just intruding into every aspect of our life, and that's what appealed to me about the Libertarians, because we want to push back against that. Get out of our lives. Be the smallest and more efficient you can. Give us the basic services, and let private enterprise take over. Because private enterprise is going to get us out of this mess, mate. Government growing bigger is unfortunately going to get us more and more into the mess of debt, and more constrained, more red tape, Like people often say to me, "You've got a bit of a stoop, Jim," and I just say, "Well, you know what that is?" I said, "That is the
weight of the world."
Yeah, the weight of the world and the weight of bureaucracy on them, because it is just like young people growing up today think all these laws and regulations are normal. When like in the last couple of decades, you can see where we've come from to where we are now. It is just the weight of bureaucracy and red tape and green tape that is just controlling every aspect of our life, and it's stifling our productivity and I guess our free will.
Yes. Okay, so Jim, let's talk about housing affordability.
Mm-hmm.
And there's obviously limited resources, and there's a finite amount of property in Australia for residents. Here you have government bringing in another 750 to 1 million people per annum. We have existing Australians that are living in tent cities at the moment or can't get back into the property market.
Yep.
Here we are faced in southeast Queensland, which is about to experience the Commonwealth Games 2032, which if you look at like what happened with Expo 88, etc., will probably drive property prices exponential. Government's talking about introducing these sort of rent to buy schemes where people only have put 2% in, 2 to 5% in, so it makes it more accessible, but then also drives up costs and affordability by default as well. Then there's all the other people that really want to be able to move to regional areas and be able to live off grid and be given the size and the density of Australia. I remember reading statistics, these people thinking that the world is sort of overpopulated. I think that the statistics were that if every person in the world had a quarter of an acre, they would fit within Australia. What's the Libertarians' plans in relation to housing affordability moving forward?
Well, look, really, and again, you might get sick of me saying this, it's the government that's getting in the way. They're blocking houses being built. The more government tries to get in and regulate the housing market, the worse it's going to be.
But why are they blocking it? Given that a lot of the councils in Australia are broke,
they're
wanting is to cram as many people into a housing estate as possible, shaving them down to 200 square metre block sizes.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Yeah.
So it's about breaking those shackles and opening up more of Australia. And, a lot of councils are ruled by state government. Remember in legislation, councils, and it says it, councils are basically instrument of the state and they will treat them as such. So the state government develops the state land planning policy, and then the councils develop their own local government planning scheme under that, which is very restrictive and ties a lot of land development up in a lot of red tape, green tape. And we need to break those shackles down. We need to empower local governments to actually open up more land for development by influencing the state. And that's what I do as a senator. I would pressure the states, as I would local governments as well, to break those shackles up, to have so that there's less constraints on development on the in the rural urban boundaries. Open those rural urban boundaries up. Allow more development around major transport hubs as well, because that's where people want to live.
Because I was going to say there is infrastructure there is development that's happening, but they're not building the infrastructure fast enough to keep up with the demand, where a lot of the suburbs are becoming gridlocked.
Well,
with
that's
traffic,
right.
etc.
Well, look at the one of the fastest growing cities in Australia, Ipswich, and look at that massive growth that's going through southern Ipswich, Ripley, right out to Plainlands. And look at all the bridge infrastructure that is falling behind. Look at all the intersections that haven't been upgraded. It's the governments are more interested in developing nice shiny things like Cross River Rail, like big stadiums, but they haven't focused on the building blocks that allow development to happen seamlessly. And so there's less traffic congestion issues. And Ipswich is a perfect example of that. And the other thing is that, like a lot of local governments, I know in regional areas, are struggling. They're struggling because, again, the state and the federal government has pushed all these regulations down on them, saying, well, you've got to have all these different policies that constrain development. And local governments are frustrated because they've got access to all this land, but they can't develop it, and they haven't got the required resources to link up all your trunk infrastructure. And the federal government are making I guess, grants and that competitive based for when they should be in it like a base allocation to local governments to help them with their development needs. And so we've got water infrastructure that can be linked up to new housing developments. So it doesn't put as much pressure on the developers that said, oh, we're keen to develop this new development, but the local government goes, well, mate, we haven't got the money for this main infrastructure road here or the trunk infrastructure as in water and sewer. And so the developer goes, well, I can't afford it. That's what's restricting it. But the other key thing, and I'll go back to the Paris Climate Change Agreement, all the National Building Code in Australia, like this place would have been built under, it's adding 70% to the cost of a new build.
Yeah.
So
I was going to mention to you, there's statistics, something like 10,000 builders that have gone broke in the last couple of years.
That is right, because look, 70% to a cost of a new build. I've got a mate that lives near Kingaroy. He's just built a new house, and it's cost an extra, like basically he said another 80 or 90,000. Like you've got to build disability ramps into your property. You've got to have a certain density of lighting, the installation. All these things add cost. But when you've got a young family living under the Bremer River Bridge in the mud with 3 children, mate, it's just we need to get those people into houses, but we need the private industry to build those houses, and they're only going to do that when we have less regulation to actually let the industry breathe, because the government is not letting it breathe. The government is trying to get in the way. Government doesn't know how to build in houses. Private industry knows how to build houses, mate. They need to, back to the cats ideology we're talking, get out of the way and free up private enterprise to build. And making sure that, like, look at we've got a real native industry hardwood issue here, where they're limiting, basically timber issue, limiting the amount of Australian timber that can be used in building houses. They'd rather we go and export or import timber from overseas, which is harvested right down to the beach, where, look at the Victorian timber industry. They were only harvesting 1 tree out of 10,000, and the Greens thought that was unsustainable. All these raw materials are getting locked out. So yes, again, it is. When people say they can't get into the house and they're frustrated or they're paying too much rent, there's not enough houses available, it is the government that is stopping that. It's not private industry. Private industry is getting limited by the number of houses they can build. Government should be looking at the key infrastructure that, mate, helps housing development go along. Our roads, our bridges, our major intersections. Mate,
Yeah.
that's the way we're going to do it, mate.
Got it. Thank you. Younger people having issues with housing affordability, given how the property prices have escalated post-COVID, and the millennials are perhaps putting the blame on the baby boomers, and the baby boomers being the source of their problems in relation to housing affordability. Yes. Then you have everything else in relation to the negative gearing scheme. I used to joke about negative gearing with clients and say it was like having to spend $1 to save 50 cents.
Yep.
And the government's policy so far has lent towards treating property as an investment vehicle rather than a necessity for existence. For, Maslow's theory of hierarchy, actualization, food, clothing, shelter.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and you've hit the nail on the head there. Like, your house is the most important asset in your life, apart from your family. And really, like I've said before, we're locking a whole generation of people in Australia out of the housing market. And it's, we should be valuing the need of the younger generations to get into a house beyond anything else. And we should be making it easier. Like you were saying before, like, how can you get into the housing market when there's only way the housing market is going up and up? You said we've got the Olympics, especially in the southeast corner, which is just going to push housing prices into the stratosphere. So we've got to look at things from a government perspective that makes it easier for young people to get into the house, but doesn't stifle the investors as well. It's a fine balancing act. But, like for first home buyers, for young people, we've got to come up with the mechanisms and the infrastructure that allows them to get into the housing market, because it's a fundamental. This is where you become part of the community. This is what you go to work for each day. And really, when you think about it, when you look at the philosophy of it, if people cannot see a future where they can't either get into a cheap rental, but more importantly, even better, get into housing that they're going to build a family, have a family, go to work every day to own more of that asset, well, can I say that's pretty piss poor? And I think as a government, we've really got to have practical solutions and to make sure that investors aren't just pushing out these younger generation for people that want to get into the housing market. We've got to come up with practical examples. And I think, we've also got to look at the foreign investment of the foreign investors coming here, whacking out a heap of houses and locking people out of the ability to get into a house. And so, again, it's a fine balancing act, but I think as a priority and for the future prosperity of Australia and our families, we've got to get more young people into a house. We've got to get the housing supply up and we've got to get the rentals down, mate, but in a way that doesn't stifle, the economy.
Got it. So you mentioned biosecurity before, and I'm going to circle back to that at some point in time, but also you touched on property rights.
Yes.
And I've been coaching clients around strategy for the last 6 or 8 years. There is a lot of people that do have concerns about what's happening with property rights at the moment, particularly in relation to the digitalisation. I think there was a news article that I remember reading that came out about 2 years ago that the Victorian government had actually acknowledged that, and the big four banks had destroyed approximately about 1.8 million property deeds.
Yep.
There's a lot of people that do have a lot of concerns. The whole World Economic Forum, nothing will be happy. How will they do that? They're concerned that they're unable to get or locate or source their actual property deeds anymore. They're getting token gestures of digital certificates. They're saying the banking system and saying that we don't keep the physical titles anymore. There's some real concerns there about the diminishment of personal property rights moving forward.
Definitely, and that's a very good point. And I hear it all the time as well. People are concerned that you haven't got a hard copy deed anymore. And that's I was actually in the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Lands, it was called previous to that, and they had a project that was the digitalisation of all property deeds instead of having hard copy property deeds. And now that's happened. It's all digitalised. And what happens to that data? How is it corruptible? How secure is it? Who's it given to? And so these are legitimate concerns because there's nothing like holding a hard copy deed in your plan, in hand, and having those real dimensions of where your property starts and finishes as well, rather than just having a digital cadastral database to rely on. So we need to actually get back, I'm all for technology, but really you need a backup and you need a hard copy, and you need that in case something goes wrong.
Yeah.
And we have, there is some level of corruption as far as a virus within their databases, and that we need something as a backup. And I think people are feeling that right across the board, like with, you buy freehold land, and this is a real key thing. If you buy freehold land, you should have the ability to make money off that land and to sell that land for a profit, as long as you stick within the confines of the law. But you can see that as being reduced and reduced and reduced, and especially like how hard is it now, Paul, to actually even put an awning on your house?
Yeah.
Put a driveway, let alone thinking about putting
a tree down.
Yeah, cut a tree down. Even grazing my cows and moving my cows. I often say to people, just for example, the amount of bureaucracy that even the farming sector has to deal with, as just to roll a deck load of cattle out of my gate to sell. There's 77 pieces of legislation that I have to abide to, and I just think that is ridiculous. I spend more time in the office meeting what the bureaucrats in Canberra want and in Brisbane want, rather than looking at productivity outside and how I can improve my business. And that's across the board with small businesses, whether you're in primary production, whether you own a small shop, whether you're a small electrician company, whatever, we're just getting stifled. And that's why our productivity across the board has declined.
Yeah. Well, talking about getting stifled, I think this is pretty recent. So in reference to the Biosecurity Act, We do know now in hindsight in relation to COVID that the Biosecurity Act was introduced in 2015
Yep.
and then subsequently revised in 2017,
Yep.
which created the preface for how COVID was able to be enacted through the Chief Health Officers under the Biosecurity Act in relation to the subsequent agenda that was rolled out.
Yep.
Also, what we're experiencing just in the last week, and I think you've been involved as well, I'm not sure about that, there's a lot of people that are concerned on all levels of government overreach, including what's been happening with the fire ant treatment. I know it's a big industry, and obviously we want to be responsible with the Biosecurity Act, which, from my limited understanding, is why it was originally created, to protect our agricultural industry. Now it seems to have been inverted back onto us, where the property owners don't even have a say anymore in people coming onto their property for treatments. In some instances, for properties that perhaps don't even have infestations.
Yep.
I think the budget for the fire ant treatment was somewhere in the vicinity of $1.2 billion.
Correct.
There's some incidents that happened yesterday with police policy officers
Yep.
enforcing the landowners and the property owners not having a say in who can and come onto their property without any justification.
That's right. And if you look over since the introduction of the Biosecurity Act, especially the Queensland Biosecurity Act back in 2015,
Right.
really it puts all the power with the government. But they say that everyone has a biosecurity responsibility,
Right.
but no one's responsible. And when that happens, that's why we find ourselves in the biosecurity mess we are now, and really because government hasn't shown the leadership in a way to bring the community with them and industry with them. Let me tell you a quick story. Like back in 2000, when I was at a high level in natural resources and mines, I was pulled into the office and spoken to me by the Director General. He said, Jim, it was 2000, coming into the start of 2001, he said, you've been involved in regional service delivery. I've won a Premier's Award for working with regional communities and biosecurity issues and natural resource management issues. He said, we're going to flip that, Jim. He said, now we're going to move from a service delivery model to a pure compliance, red tape, strategic policy and legislation. And to me, I just didn't compute. At the start, I thought, well, we're about helping people. With the government, we're here to help you.
Yes.
and so I really... Trust me. So we've gone from that, and you can really see
over the last 2 decades how that's turned around. And it's about the government ruling us with authority and a top-down compliance activity. And you can really see that with what their emergency powers and COVID and how they use those emergency powers to stifle debate, to control the narrative. That's carried over to what we've recently seen with the management of fire ants by the Queensland government. Look, the projects have been going for over 21 years. Acts have increased, that they've changed, and the recent Biosecurity Act has given them enormous power.
Yes.
And so it is basically stripping away your rights as a landowner, as a legitimate landowner on freehold land. You can't stop them coming in. And just what happened yesterday in Gatton,
I thought the police were here to protect us, not enforce tyranny. This is enforcing tyranny.
I haven't gone through a reasonable excuse.
You are obstructing me from opening the gate.
Listen, I am. Listen. These guys, I've got horses in there. These guys haven't listened to my excuse yet. They're boring their way onto my property. You've cut me. You've hurt me.
I apologise for
No,
that.
I'm very sorry that I've cut you on your own property.
I told you
Listen,
we're going to open the
but you
gate.
haven't given me a chance to go through the bloody reasonable excuse. You're not giving me due process. Yes, I'll stop them. I've got them there. You can see them. Stop them. Stop them now.
Stop them
Stop them
now.
now. Stop them. Stop them. Stop them now. Stop them now. Stop them now, Roger.
You've been given the direction notice yet?
Well, they were ready for it. Trevor tried to say, well, there's no fire ants here, and there wasn't any fire ants here. And he said, well, and this is what I said to the officers and the police officers, well, there's fire ants down the road on state government land.
Yes.
Why aren't you controlling them if it's an eradication project? Because here you're going to invade all this country and there's nothing there. but they still busted through the gate. They injured that landowner's hand. He was arrested, taken off to hospital.
My name's Jim author. YouTube and Rumble channel will be displaying this today. We're here today with Trevor Holt and also some of his neighbours that are landowners in this area in Gatton. Today is the 19th, Saturday, April 2025. Last Wednesday, Trevor was arrested right here.
National Fire Ant Eradication Program.
National Fire Ant Eradication Program. They claimed that they had authority to come onto Trevor's land under the Biosecurity Act of 2015.
2014.
414, is it? Queensland is 2014. And then those same people went on to Mark's property a little later. Well, you said you did not consent, and did you put that in writing?
Yeah, heaps of times. Heaps of times just to obstruct. I gave them my reasonable excuse with a stat deck. I provided a statutory declaration that the chemicals have been known and proven to have caused harm to my cattle.
Was there proof that these chemicals caused the death of the calves?
We got the vets out and we euthanized it maybe a couple of days earlier than the other one because we knew about it, and we took it straight away to the USQ necropsy facility at USQ just up the road here in Gatton. Yeah.
And they gave you a finding?
The
liver was poisoned somehow?
Yeah, 1.5 times the normal size the liver was found to be, and it was a toxic poison. The liver was that full of toxins it couldn't filter the toxins out of the blood. And as it was going through the brain, it was causing a cognitive decline as well.
Okay, so the poisons that are used for fire ant treatment, they were the same poisons that were dropped by helicopter on your property in 2019.
2019.
And beyond, or just then?
2019.
2019.
Yeah. So
and then the calves appeared to be sick.
This is the active ingredient is S-methoprene.
S-methoprene is the active ingredient, and that's what the fire ant people came here that day to spray. That private corporation or that private entity that came here and brought what appeared to be Queensland police. Were they in fact Queensland police?
Well, this is $1 million question, I suppose. Civil police is what I've been told.
And who told you that, Trevor?
I rung up about insurance because I was injured. It was injured, and I rung up about the insurance policy of these police, and they says that they're not covered under the police general insurance because they were here as civil police.
Civil police.
So what happens is, and you can see on the standard operating procedures from the National Fire Ant Eradication Program, is they hire police members under a contract and pay them commercially in a commercial agreement.
Okay, and these police were wearing their uniforms, turned up with police cars, they had their guns, and they had everything else. Did they threaten to shoot your dogs at any particular point in time?
They said that. Yep.
Okay, so that was one of the things that they said. You told them not to come onto the property.
Their vehicle was parked on my property.
Police vehicle?
Police vehicle was parked on my private property. I asked them to leave, and they refused to leave. I said, "This is private property. Please leave. You're not allowed. You've got no reason to be here." The fire ant people were up the front, and they're there claiming to keep the peace. And I told them they were disturbing the peace. We had a lawful gathering there that was peaceful before they come, and they come, like you say, with their guns and with their tasers, very intimidating looking. And they parked their vehicle there, and they refused to move their vehicle.
Refused to move. And they were acting, as far as you know, in a civil capacity, not in a official Queensland police capacity, which is questionable anyway. However, let's go to then we'll cover this a little bit quickly. You were then arrested and handcuffed for obstructing police. That was the charge. I saw the charge sheet. So they claimed that you were obstructing the police in their duties. In their duties. Okay, so that's something that's going to come up in court. And folks, if you're watching and we're in Gatton, if you're going to come to court, come and support Trevor.
And they baited. His stock were, when you've got 10 people baiting your property, stock go crazy. All these things happening. I was just thinking, this is Australia.
Yeah.
Like what's going on with our legitimate property rights? And you can see this is an expanded program, and it's getting worse. Like like a month ago, they arrested a lady at the back of Sanford for the same thing. She didn't want her property baited with her cattle in there. Again, there was no fire ants on it. So what's going on? It's like an industry. And we all know they're not going to get rid of fire ants. It's too far up the invasion curve. We're going to have to look at processes and procedures, putting the community first of how we manage the species. So, but when you look across the board of property rights generally, it's also in how much you can use your land. Like, I take for my situation, I live in a reef catchment for the Great Barrier Reef. There's like a big electric compliance blanket over the main catchments in the reef.
Right.
And if I grow hay to feed to my own stock, not a problem. But if I grow hay or wheat or any kind of crop and I sell it commercially, I need a permit and approval. So what's the go there? Our rights have been taken away. What we can actually do with our property, how we can subdivide it up, what we can actually grow, how many stock you can run. All this stuff is being taken away from us, and it's the same with any small business. What you can it's actually stifling. And like I keep coming back to it. That's why Australia's productivity isn't going forward. We didn't have a lot of these gateways in our way before.
Yes.
Because government has grown and surrounded us.
And they are ruling us. They aren't letting Australians actually achieve what we could achieve as a country. And you can feel that. We're like, it's got this stopgap, and it's the government. It's the government that's holding back, that has created the housing crisis. It's, too much immigration.
Yes.
It's the government that really, they haven't even done a job in protecting their own people. Look at our defence system. Look at China sailing down the coast, and you know what they were doing in that Navy flotilla? They just weren't fishing in the Tasman Sea looking at the view. They were practicing with their missile teams to zero in on key Australian assets. That's what they were doing, and we let them do it without any kind of surveillance over them at all. And I think that's a failure at either side of government, when the first role of government is to protect its own people, and we can't even do that.
Yes. Well, it didn't seem to get any airplay in the mainstream media.
Yep.
There was a couple of mentions. It didn't seem to be addressed by either the Prime Minister or the Coalition.
It was just nothing, we can go over there and do that near their country as well. Nothing to see here. Like, let's just get on back to the business.
Yeah.
So, it was very disappointing. And I think people need to understand just how volatile the world is now, and how our lack of defence. Like, we have got a massive continent, and we've got a very small defence force, that's one thing the Libertarians do actually think that we should be spending more money on, and that is defence. And that is defending our homeland. That's not getting off into these forever wars that seem to pull our resources over there.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you should say that as well, because the sentiment that seems to be in the feedback that I'm getting back at the moment is that people are saying that whether it's the Labor or the Liberal Party or the NLP and the Labor Party, they're so close to the centre, they're almost homogenised. There's no point of difference anymore. Both of them are supporting what's happening in Gaza with Israel. Both of them are supporting the conflict in Ukraine. An Australian defence force is one thing, but contributing funds and resources and what they call the Bushmasters or whatever that were sent over and then end up being commandeered. When we have, and you touched on immigration, we'll talk about that a little bit as well, with what's happening with immigration. We're bringing another, 750 or 1 million people into Australia this year, when at the moment across Australia and in the regions that I'm aware of personally and experienced in southeast Queensland, working Australians living in tent cities at the moment.
It's like, just to touch on the defence first, like, why are we even contemplating giving more support to Ukraine when you look at what's happening over there? Do we want to feed the meat grinder that is killing young men and women, older people as well? We want that war to end. Like, there has got to be some compromise. Russia isn't going to stop.
Yeah, Ukraine will take anyone that turns up that wants to prepare to fight for it.
They will, and we're going the same. We're attaching ourselves to Europe, and whatever Europe says, we're agreeing with. And I think we need to step back and just look after our own region. And I think people want the government, whatever government is in power, to put Australians, and it's been said before, put us first. Care about what happens in our own country.
Yes.
Make sure we haven't got people living under bridges or living down at creek banks. Like, look, I was out at Rosewood the other day, and near the Bremer River, and there's like 3 or 4 families living in the mud in tents underneath the Bremer River Bridge. And 200 metres up the road, there's 2 core flutes of both the Liberal and Labor candidates saying, you know, what a great job we're doing, vote for us again. I just think that really cut me. That it's like they're not even seeing the real issues on the ground. And I think that gets back to the point where these professional politicians have lost touch with reality, or they don't want to see that reality. They're more interested in what's happening globally and in making sure we achieve our climate change targets, our the different treaties that we've signed up with the UN or the WHO. Australians don't want that. Australians want now we're so far down, we're heading over the energy cliff. We're heading, you know, we used to be a prosperous nation, but now we're living. Yeah, the cost of living. We want the government to focus inwards, not outwards, and actually start to fix Australia up. Actually start to, I guess, develop initiatives and make policy to look at a dramatic cut in immigration. Why are we actually letting all these people in when we've got a massive housing crisis? Yes. And the more people you let in when we're really struggling with the population we've got, the more impact it's got on all the things that we've paid with, our property rights, our roads, our bridges, our social services, our hospitals are all straining. So that is affecting the whole of society. It's just like me as a beef producer running 1,000 cattle in one paddock when it's only designed to run 100 cattle. It's just not going to work, mate. You're going to eat her out, you're going to cause damage, you're going to cause long-term damage. So to me, we've got to get back to, it sounds like Trumpish, but we've got to put ourselves first and making sure that we protect our nation first and protect our citizens first and then protect our way of life.
Well, the old saying used to be is look after your own backyard, for instance.
Well, look, any prosperous nation that is moving forward, has got high productivity, well, you get the best environmental outcomes. We can afford to, you know, we've got a good defence system. We can afford to help people in our region and help refugees overseas. But at the moment,
we're declining, and we're struggling to even look after our own population.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a win-win because we're after a win-win. Let's build up again because we're spiralling down when we should be spiralling up.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got, you know, I want to speak into encouraging people to consider the possibility. There's a lot of resignation in a post-COVID world, trust at the level of politicians and in the world is at an all-time low at the moment.
Yes.
People are resigned about the fact that there is a diminishment of choice, that they only have the 2 or 3 major parties to vote for. What's your position in relation to encouraging people to vote for or consider voting for other people like the conviction parties like yourself, like the Libertarian Party, for example, when they're just like, well, I vote for them before, but the preferences go whichever way. And one of the things before we do get to that is there's some stuff that's come out on social media recently that's indicated that people have mentioned that they're saying that the Libertarian Party are giving their preferences to the Uni Party.
Yeah, like sure.
Where that's at.
Like on our preferencing ticket, we have preference LNP in front of the Great Australian Party, only because we had concerns with the Great Australian Party gap, their financial situation, their solvency. Whether they're bankrupt or not. And so we just thought it was a risk to put them further up to the ticket, and that is why we put the LNP in front. Plus, you know, we were concerned about, and preferences is all about deals, and when really for us it's about, you know, people should have their own free will of where they number parties on their ballot paper. Well, we just do a recommendation, and I guess like for me personally this year, yeah, I think it's been quite frustrating. In future years, I'd be a lot more comfortable with just putting a 1 on our ticket and then letting people say, it's up to you guys. And because there's so much, I guess, effort wasted. But just back to that, we're all about putting the freedom parties first. And I think we've been on the front foot in trying to set up alliances to make that happen, and working with people like Senator Rennick, who we've had an agreement here in Queensland to put him number 2 and 2 for 2. And we've also had an agreement in New South Wales with a shared Senate ticket. And I think that Libertarians have been on the front foot to look at an alliance of minor freedom parties and that's the only way we're going to be and have influence over the big two. We need to get more freedom senators in, but we also to hold more of a balance of power in the federal Senate. Because that's exactly what the Greens have done. If you look at the Green model, they've got 12 senators in. They have the most influence in the upper house in Parliament. So we've got to learn from that. We've got to learn from how the Greens done it and look at ways to work together, to put our differences aside, but we need to be honest with each other as well. And I think that's what the Libertarians don't like when we negotiate honestly, and we've got other people need to follow through on that. And if you're in a party that has got money issues and potentially going bankrupt, well, that concerns us. So we just couldn't go in that direction. But look, we've preferenced the People First Party, One Nation, Trumpet of Patriots, Family First, of course. And again, we're going to put the Greens last and always will.
Yeah.
And working with other parties of how we can actually convince more people to go in that direction. Because the Greens and Labor, they're the ones that really want to take away our way of life. And again, we think the same thing about the coalition, that they are in the same bundle and we need to hammer them back into the middle. And that's what the Libertarians are going to do. We're going to be a spur on their back, Paul.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. And part of the next part of the conversation is, well, what the political landscape looks like in Australia at this point in time. There you have is like the Labor Party, which were meant to be for the workers at some point in time. And you've got Albanese now that calls anyone that questions anything that's not part of the official narrative a cooker. And then you've got Dutton, who's there at the anti-Semitism summit wearing his kipper on his head, giving his speeches to that degree. You've got the Greens and the Teals on the edges of the Labor Party as sub-factions. And then what does it look like potentially for the future of Australia for the freedom or the conviction parties to hold a balance of power moving forward in Australian landscape?
I've had a few conversations with people behind the scenes to this point in time, and really we're not going to see significant change this election cycle. We've got to be looking, because it's taken a number of election cycles to get to this point in time, to the mess we find ourselves in now. So we've got to look at the architecture that's going to get more representation in the Senate and in the lower house for freedom parties. And we've got to look beyond this election cycle to the next election cycle and the next one after that. So we can and the only way we're going to do it is on a shared basis. And we've got, and that's why the left of politics works so well, mate. They work in with each other, don't they? They put their differences aside. They mightn't agree on everything, but they work in for the greater good. That's what we've got to do. And we've got, and like this bickering between minor parties needs to stop. We've got to, and I think the Libertarians on the ground, we're doing that. We're trying to bring different groups together that have never worked together before. And we've seen that with the renewables. Like we're working with people that used to run for the Green Party, that used to think farmers weren't, farmers were, anything but environmentalists. We're working with people like the fire ants people that are against using chemicals to treat fire ants. So all these different groups are working together out in the regions and away from politics. And I think that's important. We've got to bring people together outside of politics to work together, because it's only through doing that, Paul, is that we can actually put key representatives that aren't professional politics to build a machine so we can get more people into power, because that's what's not happening now when you look. And that's why branches are so important as well. And can I just mention so the Libertarians are big on community branches. We think that community branches are key to any political party. A party that centres themselves around a particular personality without any branches, community branches, is doomed to fail.
Right.
Because they haven't got those feedback loops out in the community. So let's build it outside to actually build it inside.
So like a decentralised form of
Definitely.
governance.
Yeah, well, and we're all about bringing government closer to the people. We're all about breaking down, say, like the national education curriculum and giving, like we're all about getting rid of that. To us, there shouldn't be a federal government Department of Education. It's a duplication of what is a state responsibility. And you can say that too with what's happening with the environment on a federal level. That's a state responsibility. And so policy decisions at a federal are so far away from what's actually happening on the ground in reality. Bring it closer to the people, get them more engaged, and you get better outcomes.
Okay. So in relation to the Libertarian Party, how is it that people vote? There's obviously not a Libertarian candidate in every electorate.
No, in Queensland, we've got 3 lower house candidates. We've got one at Maranoa in David Littleproud's seat, and he's a publican, a real character, but he's a real, can I say the slang word, Ocker Aussie.
Yes.
And he's doing quite well, Michael Offerdale. And then we've got Shalini at Bonner, and she is also doing a great job. She's of Indian descent and has got a real good link with her community there. Is a businesswoman, used to work for the state government in an auditing capacity and has got very good economic management credentials. And then we've got Gary Biggs down at McPherson on the Gold Coast here. So he's a long-time local, and again, he's done a heap of community work, and he's out there on the front line. Lower taxes, smaller government. And then there's myself, who's the lead Senate candidate for the Libertarians in Queensland, and there's Lachlan Lade, who's my number 2, and he's a very active number 2. He's a Proserpine lad. He's 28. He's a go-getter. He's into Bitcoin, and he talks about he's designing life his way. And so he can see as a young person about the opportunities that we've all had in older generations, but the younger generations are missing out on. So he's big, and it's refreshing to see someone so young interested in politics.
Yes.
And really, and he says a lot of young men that he talks to, because he's big on a lot of social media platforms, are frustrated. And they are moving towards parties like us because they see the government as the main obstacle standing in the way of their prosperity. So that's very encouraging. I think, that's why we need more young people in politics. We need more people in politics that aren't professional politicians, mate.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So the thing is as well, I wanted to ask you about the pressing issues for Australia at this point in time. And I think probably the primary thing that I'm hearing is the cost of living in relation to the Libertarian Party policy in relation to dealing with cost of living. I mean, how could we not have a cost of living crisis given what the exorbitant amount of money and capital and debt that was run up during the COVID era?
Yes.
But I just wanted to touch on some of those, and I'm conscious of your time as well. So in relation to things like the cost of living, and then people do have very real concerns, particularly about these agendas that are getting rolled out at the level of the World Economic Forum, etc., for digital IDs and central bank digital currencies and all that sort of thing moving forward as well. You're...
Well, I think with cost of living, it's quite entwined. Well, first of all, can I say, we're in a cost of living crisis, and it's been our motto in this campaign because of the cost of government crisis. Government is too big. It takes too much of our taxes, spends too much of our taxes, feeding itself, making more rules and regulations, delivering less services. We need to trim government back. We need to reduce the amount of government spending, which is increasing inflation and decreasing productivity. And they're trying to print their way out of it with new money. The other thing...
I just want to say that in relation to new money, a lot of people mightn't be aware of that as well, but I saw the statistics and the figures that there has been, since 2020, there's twice as much fiat currency in existence in 2025 as what there is now. So in effect, that means that for every $10,000 that you had, you only effectively have $5,000 worth of buying power now.
So it's like theft. The more money that's printed, the more money that you've got, it's worthless.
The inflation is just another indirect form of taxation.
It is, and look at the government spending. Look at how much the government spent. I think in the last term, off the top of in this last Albanese term, it's about $346 billion they've spent. And if that's not going to increase inflation, what is going to increase inflation? So they've got to be more efficient. They've got to decrease spending, but be more efficient. So we're all about, like, I think one of the key things with cost of living as well is, like we talked about it briefly, is immigration. Stop putting fuel on the fire. We've got to reduce the level of immigration, and we've got to make immigration a benefit to Australia. Immigration has been beneficial to Australia, but at the moment we've got too many people coming in, and it's really not benefiting the people of Australia.
Well, but some people would say that that's sort of a little bit, that's being racist. Those people need to be looked after, etc. But given the fact that we have already existing Australian citizens that are working without accommodation at the moment.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, the Dutton said he'll reduce it by 25%. Why wouldn't you wind it back towards zero?
We want to wind it back to around the 50,000 mark. We want to make sure that the people that are coming into Australia hold Australian values, and that there's too many people coming into Australia that don't commit to Australian values. They don't walk the talk. You can be any skin colour you want.
Yeah.
But if you haven't signed up, when you become a citizen of Australia, if you haven't signed up to the values of Australia, well, you shouldn't be here. And if you're not prepared to that, you shouldn't be allowed in. We want to make sure, there's more, I guess, not regulation. There's more rigor put around the people coming in from cultures that mightn't agree with the values of Australia. They mightn't align to the values of Australia. And you don't just come to Australia to live in the Australian hotel and let the taxpayer fund your life. You've got to actually commit to working productively, get out into the regions where we need workers, commit to actually building a life. And that's what a lot of immigrants have done in the past, and they've built a great life for them. But at the moment, that's really not happening across the board. And we've got to, look, we've signed up to a lot of treaties. We've signed up to this, I could talk all day about the climate change agreement, the Paris Climate Change Agreement, all these things take away Australian sovereignty, take away for us to make our own decisions. We've got to get back and putting Australia first and making our own decisions for the benefit of our people. And only if we're a prosperous, rich nation again can we help other people, can we help other people overseas. But we've got to look inwards instead of outwards. And what I say, the other big cost of living issue is energy. And there's been debates over there whether nuclear, renewables. Let me say, I've done quite a bit of study. I've seen the impacts of this, talked to a lot of experts. We aren't going to get there with renewables, mate, with 100% renewables. And it's disappointing that the Dutton government still thinks that we're going to get there using 54% renewables. We need to use our own coal still, our own gas, as we transition to a nuclear future. And that's going to take time. But you can see power prices have risen, look, up to $1,300. But it's not just the cost of power. And this is what people need to understand. It's the availability of power. So we don't want to end up like South Africa and places like that might drop out of power like 3 to 4 hours a day. How can you run a business? How can you run a hotel? How can you run hospitals?
With energy rationing.
With energy rationing. And that is where we're leading to, because we are going to go from a rich nation to a poor nation. We were going to go from a nation that makes things to a nation that doesn't make anything. And you can see a lot of the businesses, they're going overseas to where the energy's cheap. They're going back to America. They're going over to China. Because what's the key fundamental there in business? It's cheap energy.
Yes.
And this Labor government seems to think that they can manage energy prices by giving us subsidies. That's just giving our own money back, Paul. That isn't going to fix the problem, mate. We've got to without energy, we have nothing. So I think energy is going to filter through every aspect of our life it has, and we've got to get it back before we go over that energy cliff and it's too late.
Yeah. Let's talk about energy alternatives, given the energy demands of growth and the technology that's going to be absorbing a lot of energy moving forward, and talking about the options including thorium energy, etc.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like you can see all around the world, countries have worked out that in their energy mix, they need solid baseload power. We still get around the world, the bulk of our baseload comes from fossil fuels, but countries are now moving to nuclear. Look at France; it gets the bulk of its power from nuclear.
How does the thorium waste compared to
Well, there really is no waste. Thorium, which we've got lots of, it's just what you feed into the reactor. Like a lot of the nuclear reactors around the world are run on uranium. Not weapons grade uranium, where in thorium you have, there's a lot of, and I think China has just released a thorium reactor, and there's no toxic waste. They're very reliable and stable. And Australia has got heaps of thorium, as we have heaps of uranium. So people like to think of the Chernobyl incident, and it's like comparing a really old HQ Holden to, I was going to say an electric car. I don't really like them that much at the moment, but to say a modern top of the range Land Cruiser wagon. So the technology has changed, and we look. We're all about producing cleaner energy. I don't believe in human-induced climate change, but I believe that climate is changing, and we need to better look after the natural resources and the environment on Earth, and that's having clean energy. But we need to have energy for a prosperous society. For economy, we still need to build things. We still need to go to cleaner energy resources, but still maintain our standard of living. With renewables, it's going to go like that. With nuclear, we'd say thorium and uranium, it's going to have an increase like that, but it's going to take time. And for Australia to think, oh, well, it's too late to go nuclear because it's going to take so long, well, that's more of an excuse of why we should be starting today. Because as the rest of the developed countries around the world, the economies are going nuclear, we are being left behind. And what you'll find that we're going to be just reliant on places like China for all our manufacturing needs and our components to run our wind turbines and solar panels, where we should be taking the grasp and going nuclear as soon as possible. It's going to cost a bit of money, but they last so long. They last a lot longer than a panel that's going to be wiped out by a hailstorm, which lasts 20 years, or a wind turbine that lasts 20, 25 years. We are going towards a future where you're going to have massive automation. And we are going to an age where there is going to be massive use of AI. And you look to America and other comparable economies, they're looking at nuclear, because nuclear provides the base loads for those new, technologies to use. And we aren't going to be able to do it where a system like renewables, it only works when the sun's shining or the wind blows, and with battery backup that only lasts a couple of hours. We're going to have blackouts, and we are going to have a weak economy. When Australia, with the amount of resources we have, with the amount of thorium, with the amount of uranium, and with the know-how we've gotten around nuclear, which we are, we're a nuclear nation, we just haven't got a civil nuclear bent to us. We need to jump on that wagon as soon as possible, or we're going to be left behind, and our industries are going to be left behind, which is going to be bad for Australia. It's going to, again, contract us down to these small, weak nations to put us in these little boxes that are easily controlled. We can't do that, mate. We've got to grow. We've got to break out of that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you should talk about energy as well, and then it sort of feeds in as we get towards the end, talking about the concerns. So Albanese, I think about 2 years ago, did a deal with Microsoft for $5 billion for what they call Cyber Shield.
Yep.
Which is basically a it's Orwellian doublespeak for a geo block of the country, where they can monitor the traffic in and out and create geofences and different proximities and smart city agendas and that sort of thing as well.
Yep.
What's the Libertarians' policy in relation to, and I preemptively sort of know, but just to get clear on it in relation to, well, there's a couple of parts about that. They're saying that there is not enough energy that already exists at this point in time to feed the capabilities of where they're taking artificial intelligence.
Correct.
To run these systems. Mm-hmm. And then people have very real concerns about what's happening with the digital ID agenda and the central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, which it's looking highly likely that Peter Dutton will be a huge advocate for the implementation of.
Yeah. It all relates back to, and this is what the danger is with the United Nations and us signing up to the Paris Climate Change Agreement, because you think, and again, it relates to energy, but it also relates to the amount of bureaucracy and control that is being filtered down through and stymieing us in all different parts of our lives. Is that if you just think of the amount of bureaucracy and red tape that's in part of our lives now, whether it's in business or private life, what we can do, what we can think, what we can say, where we can spend our money, how they hold the money, whether it's digital or hard currency. It's all about that they think that globally they must control the population to a level that limits the negative impact on the environment. And personally, I think that we've got to get out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. It is a tariff on Australia that is affecting every aspect. And to think that, look at the power section that we're looking at decarbonising is about 38% of Australians' emission, which is a pimple on a camel's butt anyway. You've got all these other different sectorial plans that they are developing for all the other elements that potentially produce emissions. They're all going to be locked in as well. So if you look across the board at that we are heading into a massive increase in red tape and authority, locking us into places so our potential impact on the environment and on emissions is locked down and controllable. How much meat you can eat a day, how far you can drive a day, what kind of car you can drive, locking up your money so you can't access it. Digital money all makes sense, doesn't it? The 15-minute cities.
Well, that's the capability for anyone that doesn't know about central bank digital currencies. I've been talking about it for about 8 years. So central bank digital currencies have the capability to be taxed, traceable, taxable and confiscatable in real time.
That's right.
And be set to be able to say, Jim, you have this amount of money. If you don't spend it within 6 or 12 months, it expires. And you're only able and allowed to spend it within this geographical location.
And Jim, you've just had 2 steaks in 3 days, mate.
That's it.
Sorry.
That's your quota.
That's my quota for the month. So, no. And that's what's happening. And it's happening more rapidly. But what the government does is portray that they want to control the narrative of all the benefits of this increased control, authority, top down. You can feel the top down approach, and it's all about this control and authority isn't going to go away whether Labor and the Greens get in or the coalition with Liberal and Nationals get in. So this is where the Freedom Party have got to put a block here and start keeping either side honest. And like the Libertarians, like we've got left-sided policies and right-sided policies, but what we're about is we're either more control or less control, more freedom or less freedom. And I think that's what we've got to get. We've got to be in this block to stop either of these uniparties going forward and meeting these international agreements. Because if we don't, we'll be living in 15-minute cities. I'll only be eating a steak a month and I'll be happy with it. There'll be no more flights everywhere. No, there won't be any country jaunts. Look at what they're locking us out of the great outdoors. You can't climb this mountain. You can't climb that mountain. You can't go on this beach. They're transferring a lot of freehold country over to Aborigines, but it used to be reserves. All this is part...
Well, not only that, foreign ownership with China and India.
Definitely.
I can't, Australians can't go and own property in foreign countries.
That's right. And Libertarians believe we don't mind foreign investment, but it's got to be reciprocal.
Yes.
And it's the same people with free trade. You just want to give away Australia and give us... Well, a lot of the free trade agreements, if it's not in Australia's benefit, well, we shouldn't be doing it. So let's not... Libertarians are all about putting our country first and looking after Australians first.
Yes.
And having a social safety net, sure, but there's a limited time frame on that social safety net. We want to get people back into working and back into, I guess, a productive life.
Yes.
And because I think that, and look at our education system, like everything that government does is trying to fragmentate the family. It's trying to make us feel guilty for being Australian. It's trying to stifle our development, stifle our productivity, and rely on government handouts.
Yes.
And that's exactly where you were saying.
I joke about it sometimes, Jim, and say that as a white, straight Christian male, I feel like a minority group in Australia these days.
I'm with you. I'm definitely, mate. And that's what's scary.
Yeah.
Like, where's the old Australia gone? Of course, we're never going to go back to the way it was, but those values, that common sense, that fair play, the volunteerism, respecting families are the cornerstone.
Yes.
Where's that gone?
Yeah.
They're trying to break that down, and people are crying out for traditional Australia to return, because we can still be a partner on the world stage. We can still be part of the UN, but we have our own sovereignty. And I think that's, people are just waiting for politicians to come through to go, hey, this guy's different, or this party's different, because you know what? They're about what I used to see in Australia. You know, they're larrikins. There's nothing wrong with being a bit of a larrikin.
Yes.
And, you know, what's wrong with stirring each other a bit? It's not racism. We've always laughed, and we can laugh at each other. But, I mean, it's about getting together as a country because, you know, the separatists and separatism and identity politics that's going around now, mate, they'll be on the wrong side of history.
Yeah.
And we've got to come together, and I know other people have said it, as one people, one flag, and let's get on with business, because as we're just sitting here getting more controlled and more corralled into this box, the world is going on. And we've got to get ourselves ready for the age of AI,
Yes.
to making sure that we give our young people the best chance we have of going forward in a world that is rapidly evolving. And let me tell you, it's getting more and more volatile. So we've got to make sure we've got a good defence system to protect Australians.
Yes.
And that should be the first priority of any government.
Yes. So, Jim, when I was in the US a couple of years ago, speaking and performing, one of the speeches that I gave was based on Patrick Henry's famous speech in the US, "Give me liberty or give me death."
Yep.
Basically laying it on the line. That's what liberty, or being a libertarian, embodies to me, in relation to here's little old Australia down in the Southern Hemisphere, getting involved in conflicts and being positional about supporting what's happening in Gaza, or supporting Israel, supporting Ukraine with that conflict. What are your thoughts on the Australian government, or the Australian political landscape, weighing in and giving commentary to what's happening in relation to, the conflict as far as Russia is concerned?
Well, can I say, from a policy point of view, from the Libertarians, we're all about defending Australia and non-confrontational. So we don't support any troops or any material going to feed the war between Ukraine and Russia. And we don't know why we're being dragged into that. And we would not support any kind of support going to that war. The same with the Gaza-Israel conflict. We think we should be pulling back and making sure that we've got an active, bristling self-defense capability, because, like I said before, we've got powers in the Pacific that, sailing around our continent, and we've got to make sure that we look after our own people. And that is not to say that if someone unprovoked attacked one of our allies, like America, on home soil, of course we're obligated then. But I don't see how we should be pulled into this war in Russia and Ukraine. Why? Why should we? And I think people are looking at now and looking at Albanese going, he's considering sending our own troops over there into a meat grinder. I don't think, no, Australians, and I think that there would be support around Australia that shouldn't happen, and we shouldn't keep supporting those wars. We should pull back and make sure that we've got the capability to defend ourselves, because I don't think personally at the moment we have got the capability. We're swinging in the breeze, mate, and that's why China is just going around and testing our leadership. They see us as a weak country with no vision.
We must be a soft target at the moment.
We are, and they use that. You watch now, like you can see all the tariffs coming from, Trump, and then China's moved in and say, well, mate, we're going to look after
Tariffs.
That's right. We're going to, those nasty Americans, and they use that. What they're doing is showing you that Australian people, the Chinese, that they've got the capability to go around Australia and do what they want. We can even go with a little research vessel here and check out your undersea cables. And what are you guys doing? You just think it's okay. So they use that as a brinkmanship, as a show of strength to help dictate policies that are going to put them on a better keel in Australian politics, mate, when we should be showing our strength. Where's the ticker in Australia to stand up for our sovereignty? All that is about weakening our sovereignty. If we send resources overseas, it is again weakening our sovereignty, and we've got to make sure we become hardened, that we're still a player in the region, but it's all about looking inward and building our capability. That is not to say we wouldn't go and help our allies if they were attacked for no reason on their own soil, as they would to us. But going over to Ukraine, going over to Gaza, Israel, why? No, I'm totally against.
Got it. Absolutely. So anything else, Jim, that you'd like to share us about people being considerate of contributing and voting towards the Libertarian Party move as we move into the May 3rd election, 2025?
I just want, if people are tired of being told what to do, if they can feel the weight of authority in every aspect of their lives, and no matter how hard they work, they can't get ahead, well, shine your light towards the Libertarians, because we want to reverse that. We want to put you in control of your life again, have more choice, and do the money that you earn should stay with your family, because you know how to best look after yourself and your family. And so, like this election, act differently. By voting Libertarians, you're not going to vote for a major party. It's going to go towards all the other freedom parties that have very similar ideals to us, and that we've got to come together and be a block between the uni parties that returns traditional Australia. Because if we don't, and if we just be apathetic and think the government's going to sort it out, well, we're going to find ourselves in this little box with limited freedoms and being told that it's good for us. And I don't think any Aussies want that, mate. We're not that kind of people.
No, we're not. Good luck, Jim. Thank you for joining us.
No, thanks,
Good
Paul.
on
It's
you.
been a pleasure.
Cheers.
Nice.